Let's create a pivotal impact.
Good day and welcome back to the Chuck Focus podcast. We're your hosts, Avery Hannaberry, and my dad, Josh Hannaberry. In today's episode, we're excited to be recording another edition of the Youthful Take of Transportation, a podcast series where the goal is educating youth and teens on different opportunities in the transportation. Today I interview Inspector Alan W. Wintermute R.S.E. retired as we dive into his journey as a heavy duty mechanic and as a law enforcement officer. Well, let's get to it. One. Good day, Alan, and welcome to the series, A Youthful Take on Transportation. I am super stoked and it's just an honor to see you and just have an opportunity to interview you today.
Pleasure to be here. It's good to meet you this way.
Yeah. So just to start off things off in the conversation, can you share with us who is Alan and what would you say has been the highlight in your career for transportation?
Well, I started my career in transportation as a mechanic.
Oh,
I
nice.
completed 5 years of an apprenticeship. Then I worked in the trade for a few years. There was some economic slowdowns, and one of my customers that toured into the shop periodically with his car said he needed some help with product liability cases that he had. He was a lawyer,
Okay.
and I went to work for the lawyer for a little bit, helping him with his liability cases. I took a real keen interest in court matters, and eventually I developed into a paralegal, handling my own files, especially in traffic court. And at the end of the career with him, he wanted to retire, and there was a job application come out for transportation inspector. I applied for that, tendered my licenses in automotive mechanics, and submitted that along with the actual application. And that year, I was one of 42 that were hired, but only 6 in the new hires had mechanics licenses.
Oh, wow.
So that certainly helped me get my foot in the door. So, I worked as a truck inspector, also buses, inspecting buses for safety defects for the Ministry of Transportation in Ontario.
Hmm.
Now let's see, as a highlight. While I was in training, I was underneath a trailer and actually got bit by a dog that was owned by the driver.
Oh, really?
Now that's not hardly a highlight. I'm just kind of kidding around with you a little bit. A highlight, I became an instructor in basic training. So really a highlight would be attending a truck inspection station with a small group of new recruits. And I had a recruit sitting on top of the board directing traffic through the truck inspection station, recognized that there was a critical defect on one of the trucks. And I said to the recruit, have a look at the buttons, because I need you to press the right button. You got to really be careful about this. I want you to stop the truck, like now. He looked down, stopped the truck. He said, okay, what am I missing? Have a look at the wheel right in front of you. And out of 8 fasteners that should be in place, there was only 1.
Oh,
The
wow.
rest were broken away. So I said to him, now you recognize that that's not right? And he said, oh yeah, that's not right. I said, okay, look down at the buttons again. I need you to press the park button and have them come around the back for further inspection. Now, sometimes they don't come around the back, and I was all set to run out, jump in the cruiser and go after him if I needed to. But as luck had it that day, he was cooperating and he come around the back. And collectively, we went out to inspect the truck. And the driver, I think, was taken aback because now there's 7 of us looking at his truck. And I had him step out and go to the wheel that we saw with only one fastener. He kind of looked at it. And then some of the new inspectors went around and checked the other wheels. And he come back and said, there's another wheel that has some loose fasteners on it. So I said to the driver, hey, if you go and have a look the same way as, and I'll show you how to do it, borrow my gloves. And I showed him how we inspect for loose fasteners. He borrowed my gloves. And I said, now, if you find the wheel that's got a couple of loose fasteners, we'll take that into account when we go to lay charges here. He went around and sure enough, he did find the wheel. And he said to me, how am I supposed to know how to do that? The one officer in training said, you know, until you were prompted to check, the rest of us were checking your truck. Until you were prompted, you didn't even take into consideration that maybe you better have another look at your wheels. I'm kind of surprised about your attitude. His jaw dropped and he almost lost the cigarette that was in his mouth. And so that would be a highlight for sure, because it was a teaching moment that doesn't come up every day.
Yeah.
And certainly the new inspectors in training learned something that day, as well as the driver. And for me, the highlight was the reaction of the driver being talked to that way with somebody that was actually brand new on the job. It was like his first 2 or 3 days working. He'd finished his classroom and now he's in the field with one of us to learn how to do what he'd learned in the field, in the classroom. So it was certainly a highlight.
Wow. How long did it take for that situation? How long did it take for that to happen?
For the fasteners to come loose?
Yeah.
Okay, usually what happens with that, so somebody will change a wheel.
Yeah.
Like upgrade their tires from a tire that's worn out to a brand new tire. And if they're not right on top of checking it, those fasteners can come loose within 200 kilometers.
Oh, wow.
So they really have, especially when they do any repair work on the wheel itself, they have to be on top of it for the first, say, 1,000 kilometers. But if they're going to be a problem, it'll happen within 200 kilometers.
Oh. So what would happen if the fasteners all came off?
The wheel comes off.
Oh.
Yeah, and it's really a critical defect. Oftentimes, when a wheel comes off, it hits another vehicle on the road. And if the truck is doing highway speeds, 80, 90, 100 kilometers an hour, those wheels can weigh 60 pounds a piece.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And just a little bit of math for you, if you want to do the calculation when we finish this interview, for every mile an hour that the vehicle's going,
yeah,
you multiply the weight times that mile an hour. So if it's 50 kilometers, the equivalent is 30 mile an hour. So 30 times 60 is 1,800 pounds. If that hits a car, it's like another car hitting the car.
Oh.
There's a lot of damage.
Yeah,
it can be fatal.
We would not want that to happen.
We want that coming through the windshield for sure.
Yeah. So one of my favorite parts, and it's pretty, I always think of this whenever I think of the trucking industry, is the different types of trucks that go on the road and the different types of cargo that they move on trailers. So with your experience as a heavy duty mechanic and working in law enforcement, did you notice any trucking companies using different types of equipment that made it safer for the roads?
Oh, I sure did. Let's just talk about brakes for a minute. There's two basic type of brakes that's on a commercial motor vehicle. One's a drum brake and one's a disc brake.
Yeah.
Both kinds of brakes rely on friction. Okay, so you've got either a brake shoe on a drum that rubs on the inside of a drum to stop the vehicle. Or you've got a disc, and if you picture your dinner plates standing up on edge with a brake pad on both sides of that dinner plate, that's your friction material that stops the truck. Okay, so either way, it's a friction brake. The advantage to the disc brake, because of the design, it will cool faster. With the friction, you've got an awful lot of heat buildup. With the drum brake, because it doesn't dissipate the heat, what you end up with is a brake fade. So if a truck is coming down a steep incline, like where you are, you're very close to mountain.
Yep.
So if a truck is coming down the side of a mountain and the driver's got his foot on the brake for a long duration, there's an awful lot of heat buildup.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so with that heat, you end up with brake fade, which is a greatly diminished amount of braking power. With the disc brake, it cools much better, so you don't have the brake fade. So it's a safer setup for a situation like that. The other time it's very important, out near where I live, near Toronto, going across the city, you've got a lot of stop and go traffic.
Yeah.
With a lot of stop and go traffic, there's a lot of heat buildup in the brakes there too. And if the driver doesn't allow himself enough distance as the brakes get warm, and there's no sensor there to tell him, then it lengthens the amount of time he needs to stop the truck. So with a disc brake, it's a whole lot safer than a drum brake in either one of those two situations. And when it comes to, let's pick on garbage trucks. As they go through your neighborhood, there's a lot of stop and go with a garbage truck.
Yes.
So ideally, they'd have disc brake. Now, what the benefit is, the disc brake lasts longer than a drum brake because the heat causes the brake shoes to deteriorate. Once they start to deteriorate, then they start wearing out a whole lot faster. And it costs money to replace the friction materials.
Yes. Hey everyone, Avery here. Just a quick interruption of our conversation, as I really want to encourage you to check out Alan's book, Insights from the Inside. In his book, Alan talks about really important things that you need to know to be safe on the road. Well, let's get back to the episode. So, with more trucks having drum brakes, would you say that they are better than disc brakes?
That's a very good question. Avery, you must have been doing some research here on disc brakes.
I have been reading your book.
Okay, it's starting to show. This is good. The drum brakes have improved over the years because the disc brakes stop more efficiently in a shorter distance. The drum brake manufacturers have made the shoes bigger, wider, so that they're comparable in stopping distance. Although because of the heat fade, the disc brakes are still much more superior and better in stop and go or on the steep incline that we already talked about. So yeah, disc brakes are definitely better than the drum brake, but there's other advantages than just stopping distances and avoiding the heat fade. When you start talking about time it takes to replace the friction materials on a drum brake, on an axle with brakes on both sides, you're looking at about 2 hours. This is after the wheels are off. Okay, when you compare it with a disc brake setup, and again after the wheels are off, because you can't do any servicing of the brakes with the wheels on.
Yep.
It would take about 20-25 minutes to service a disc brake. There's no moving parts. There's nothing more to service. So when you talk about what it costs to just do the labor, at $100 an hour, you can already see that there'd be a savings. 25 minutes compared to 2 hours. It's a substantial savings. And then the servicing on a disc brake is good for the life of the friction materials, whereas the drum brake would have to be serviced periodically. So it starts to add up on the cost.
So disc brakes would last longer than drum brakes for a longer period of time?
As far as mileage goes.
So,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead. Oh, it's okay. Go ahead.
See, a disc brake, you could probably get more than a year's service on a typical driver. Whereas a drum brake, if you got the year, you've done very, very well on the friction materials, although you would have to service the drum brake throughout the course of that year.
Yeah.
On the disc brake, you simply crawl under it, have a look, make sure that the friction materials still have enough surface life, and leave them alone unless there's a problem, of course.
Yeah. So would disc brakes, you said that they would be a little less tiring for drivers. If they're less tiring, how come owners would go with drum brakes at all?
Very good question. Most of the trucks come with the drum brake. If a purchaser wants to have disc brake, they would order the truck with the disc brake. Now, there's a little bit of an additional cost to that. On a 3-axle truck, which is a standard tractor, you'd be looking at about $1,500 per axle for disc brakes, more than the drum brake it would have come with. So for a 3-axle truck, you'd be looking at about an additional $5,000 on the purchase price. So if a purchaser is only looking at the difference between the purchase price and not considering anything else, they'd probably go with the less costly truck. However, if you look at what it's going to cost, say, in the lifetime that someone's going to own that truck, and a typical highway tractor is going to be good for about, well, let's say 10 years.
Oh, wow.
Okay, they will last 10 years, and you can get a couple of million miles out of a well-maintained truck. So if you took what it would cost to maintain drum brakes over the 10 years and compare what it costs to maintain the disc brakes over the 10 years, even by adding the extra $5,000 additional purchase price, your typical purchaser would realize that you'd be money ahead over the entire lifespan of the truck. Now, I'll give you a little phrase, and maybe you can take careful note and remember it. But what we're talking about here, and fleet managers and accountants like to use this phrase, they call it life cycle costing.
Oh.
Okay, life cycle costing includes what additional monies it costs to buy a vehicle with the safety equipment, and then spread out what it's going to cost to maintain that vehicle over the lifetime of the truck, and compare it with a truck that does not have that equipment and what it would cost to maintain over the same amount of miles. And they come up and now they can do a realistic comparison. So anybody that is an owner operator, unless they're talking to their accountant, wouldn't consider life cycle costing.
Oh.
They just kind of look at the price tag. If they're in a corporation that has professional fleet managers and accountants, then they might consider life cycle costing. It's relatively new to the industry. But I think as time goes on now, if they consider that kind of a situation of life cycle costing, the more trucks might come out with disc brakes. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense. So if a truck or trailer has its brake change, would it be easier for a driver? So either way a disc brake into a drum brake or a drum brake into a disc brake?
Yes, and it can, those brakes can be changed. But to change it after the truck is built costs more than the $1,500 to buy the truck, $1,500 per axle to buy the truck so equipped.
How much would it cost?
Well, to make a change on a 3-axle truck could cost, if you had your local dealership do it, could cost around $10,000.
Wow.
Now, if a corporation has their own mechanic, they're not paying the $100 an hour rate to an outside shop, they can do it for less. But not every truck can be converted.
Oh, so some trucks
Okay,
can only stay at that certain brake?
unless they're ordered with the disc brake in the first place. Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, you in order to properly look and see if that change can be made, they'd have to ask a lot of questions.
wow.
And can it be done first of all, and if so, how much? How much money?
How long would
And
it take?
how long would it take? That's a real good question. It depends on the truck, of course, but I have seen it where it's a little over 20 hours of labor.
Wow.
Okay, so this is why it's more important to know what you want to do and research a new purchase rather than convert an existing truck.
That's a lot of time and money.
It really is. And you know, if the truck's already part of the fleet, you're taking a truck out of service for that amount of time. That's half a week's work
Wow.
taken away from the income that truck could produce for a company.
That's incredible.
It is. It really is.
So now I would like to talk about the book that you wrote, Insights from the Inside, which my dad showed me, and I think it's awesome. I loved it, and just reading it, I was wondering what was it like what was it like writing your book?
Well, I didn't start out to write a book. That's the honest answer.
Oh,
Um, when I retired from the industry, I was looking for something to do. And it was just at the beginning of COVID, and the whole world was upside down.
yes.
I started considering doing some consulting work. And what thought crossed my mind is, if I had a group of drivers or a group of owner operators, I'd probably want to put a PowerPoint presentation together. So I started to make a list of topics. And then from there, I started to write out what I'd cover in each one of those topics. And then I started to consider, okay, what would I say about each one of these subtitles on the main topic title? And before long, I started to make a lot of notes. And then when I started looking at it, I had a little over 100 pages written out, and I was only really halfway done.
Wow.
So then it occurred to me that, gee, maybe this could be a book. So I asked my wife to have a look at it, and she works in a dental office. She doesn't know anything about trucks. So when she read over my notes, she got in there probably 10 or 15 pages and handed it back to me. And she said, it doesn't make any sense to me. And I said, what do you mean? And she, well, have a look at these phrases. Have a look at some of these words. I don't understand. So I went through what I'd written and compiled a glossary of terms and put it all in alphabetical order and showed her the glossary. And I said, would you mind having another look at what I've written and see if that helps? She ended up getting all the way through the 100 and whatever pages I had at the time. And now I understand it.
Wow.
So from there, I'm thinking, okay, this could be usable for somebody that wants to get new into the industry, like someone coming out of school and wanting to be a driver. But there's enough information in there that somebody that's been around the industry for a while that wants to expand their information and knowledge, there's something in there for them too. So with that in mind, I completed what I'd started, and we ended up with a book.
Wow, that's pretty awesome.
It didn't start out that way, like I say, but that's how it got to be where it is.
Did you ever think it was gonna be a book?
No. Going back to my life is a uniformed truck inspection officer. My favorite part of the job was going into trade fairs and meeting with people and answering their questions.
Yes.
And probably that gave me the idea of coming up with some PowerPoints and making some presentations to the industry. And from there, the book was born.
Wow, that's incredible. Would you ever think of writing another book?
The thoughts crossed my mind. Certainly, I've scratched the surface with this one. As the industry evolves, there's changes that come out. My biggest concern was by the time this book got published, some of the information would have changed. Laws change all the time.
Yeah.
So that was always a kind of a concern. And with that in mind, I had to know when to stop writing and get the book out while it was still relevant.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it crosses my mind I might have to do some updates for sure.
Yeah, it'll be pretty interesting to see what'll happen. So just as we come to a close here, were there any final thoughts that you would like to share that you feel is important for me to share with other youth?
Oh, absolutely. First off, Avery, I'm really impressed with the interest you've taken in the transportation industry.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I love it.
The questions you've asked today, together with my observation of you conducting others that other interviews with other people, tell me that you've got a very keen interest in detail. So my bet is that you've discovered that the industry has so many different people with specialized skills, from drivers, dispatchers, fleet managers, mechanics, accountants,
Yeah.
even lawyers. And there's others in place. So my thought is that there's a special place for anybody, any one of your classmates, for example, that's looking for a job later on. So with that in mind, I wish you the very best, Avery, as you find your place in the world.
Thank you. Yeah, I really appreciate that, Alan. Just it was just awesome to have you on today's Youthful Take, and I'm really happy that I got to meet you. But it'd be nice if I could meet you in person as well. That'd be pretty awesome.
It's been a pleasure meeting you as well. I do have family out in Edmonton.
Nice.
So you never know if COVID straightens out a little bit and I make my way out. I'll have to send your dad an email, let him know that that's happening, and hopefully we can get together.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. And thank you again for joining on today's episode, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
It's been my pleasure, Avery. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye now.
Alan, thank you so much for joining me on the Youthful Take on transportation today. I really enjoyed our conversation. I have to say, you taught me a lot, but the number one most important thing that I learned today is that disc brakes last longer than jump brakes, and that people need to pay attention to make sure their vehicles are safe before being on the road, so that nobody gets hurt and that the driver doesn't get hurt. And thank you again, Alan, for joining me today. And I really recommend people check out your book, Insights from the Inside.
Yeah, Alan, thank you so much for joining Avery on Youthful Take today, and just for your dedication in the industry. honestly, years of service as a heavy duty mechanic, as a law enforcement officer, and now writing the book, becoming a consultant, and just the impact that you're having on our journey, obviously on other people's journeys. It's really inspiring. And just listening to you and Avery have a great conversation that I'd say both of us were kind of like, whoa, he's really grasping the content. Okay, he gets it. He's picturing his mind. He's asking questions. I think that's really valuable, and I really appreciate that. And again, our mission with Youthful Take on Transportation series is to basically educate and empower Avery as a youth to understand the various components that go on in the transportation industry, so that way he can do two things. One, it's in his mind. So he's mindful of just what it takes when he's out and about in his day, so he can show appreciation, but more so he can teach other youth to certain things to be appreciative of and understand, and getting to a point where we can do this in schools, where we can have Avery present and teach people of his peers to say, hey, there's tons of opportunities in transportation. There's tons of things you need to consider. So many things that go into being successful in transportation, and possibly it's a career choice, possibly it's a complement to a parent's career choice, but ultimately just your investment in time today is really valuable. So we just wanted to say thank you. So as well, we also want to give a huge shout out to our dedicated listeners for once again checking into the Truck Focus podcast and the Youthful Take on Transportation series. It really does mean a lot. If this is the first time you've ever checked out a Truck Focus podcast, I really welcome you to our community. And I'm just super grateful for your investment of time. Of course, we do ask that you like this episode and really share it out, because ultimately we all know a youth that has something they can learn about the transportation industry. And that's our ultimate mission with this series. So thank you again. And finally, I do ask that you subscribe to the channel that you were listening on, just so that way you can be notified of upcoming episodes, because we do release an episode at least once a week. So thank you so much again. And just Alan, really appreciate just your guidance and your mentorship in this space. So yeah, have a good rest of your day. Thanks so much.